speak up, not necessarily when you're the expert, but when you feel like you can, just have a small addition to the conversation, right?
Welcome back to another installment of the Next Gen Case Study Series. On today's episode, we have Sean Hector, who is the Director of Global Sales Development and Sales Enablement at SysAid, a leading IT service management solutions provider with a proven track record in sales and customer success. Sean has been instrumental in driving SysAid's growth by leveraging cutting-edge AI technologies to enhance sales processes and customer engagement strategies, which is why we're excited to have him on the show. Sean, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
The pleasure's all mine. I'm excited to get into this. I'd like to start with a quick little 2 or 3 minute kind of background on who you are, where you came from, and how you kind of landed as the director of global sales at SysAid.
Yeah, definitely can do that. So ultimately, I actually got my start in my career doing executive recruitment right out of school. From Ottawa originally, so I moved to the big city of Toronto to, as I said, start a career, make a name for myself. Ultimately, that gave me an opportunity to be in boardrooms with executives. And, I was the note taker in the corner for the most part, but it really gave me that first kind of foray into the executive boardroom and would prove very useful in some conversations down the line. From there, I realized, right, I was kind of as I said, the guy on the sidelines, listening to other people's stories. So I realized I wanted to be the protagonist of my own story. So I made the jump into tech sales at that point. So I joined Top Hat, which was kind of an education technology company at the time, and still to this day. It's kind of like a very, I'd say, Canadian unicorn. Big projections at the time. It was, again, my first foray into, I would say, the tech scene in Toronto, ping pong table, served lunches and all that sort of stuff. So it was a really, really exciting time. So I was an account executive there for about a year or so. And then I realized that my passion really lay in management and leadership. And so from there, I kind of went over to the CS side. I started managing an onboarding team at Top Hat. Then I realized, my overall goal one day is I want to be a CEO. So I realized that I needed to start attaching myself back to a revenue number. So I went to start managing a sales team. COVID happened. I got pivoted into kind of manager of the sales development team. And then I joined SysAid, and 3 years on, I've led the inbound teams, the outbound teams here. I've recently taken on sales enablement as well. And a big part of the responsibility is really just kind of maturing this 20-year-old organization, but it's been bootstrapped for most of that time up until we received a sizable investment about 5 years ago. So we're really trying to take that investment and drive that maturity that I spoke about, but through the implementation of tools, processes, the right people, career pathing, all that sort of stuff. That brings us to today.
That's quite a colorful background. It seems to me like you were very intentional with your choices to be among some very big players. I wonder how being a fly on the wall for some of those bigger conversations kind of influenced the way that you do things. Could you share maybe some of the lessons you learned that, as a fly on the wall in some of those scenarios?
Yeah, a lot of it was understanding kind of the thought process behind some of these executives, right? I was really new, right? I was fresh from school at that, like that executive recruitment spot. But a lot of it was trying to understand how people approached certain situations, how they ultimately communicated their outcomes and their successes as well. A funny anecdote, I was once in the room with kind of the VP marketing of Molson Coors, and they brought over like Belgian Moon to Canada, right? Like, that's not a lesson, but I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Thanks. I enjoy that beer at the end of the day. But further to that, it also taught me how to encapsulate someone's experience and a story and be able to kind of put that pen to paper and ultimately summarize that and help others, whether or not it was our clients or the principals at our organization, right, properly understand this person's experience and where they came from. But finally, some things that I've taken forward into leadership, know your numbers, right? The humility that's important in certain aspects, to know when to speak up and know when to stand your ground as well. And finally, just like, it was my job, but I still take this forward to this day, is like, be in the room, right? Like
Mm.
you will miss out on opportunities if you are not in that room. So always take that opportunity to even, at my level today, be the fly on the wall, and learn from those around you.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about somebody who's brave enough to get in there and get dirty, even though they may at times feel like they don't fit or maybe they're too new to it. So the brevity that it takes for somebody to go in there with some of these big players and not just observe, because I'm sure that there was some moments where you found that you could have some influence on how things are going, and that's kind of led you to the place where you're at now, where you actually are, influencing and making decisions that affect a lot of people. I wonder, Sean, if you could kind of explore some of your day-to-day stuff. What does a day in the life of Mr. Hector look like?
For sure. And I just wanted to comment on one thing you said, and then I'll get to my day to day. When I first got into my the manager onboarding role, right? Like I was coming from sales and I was someone that, I was the sales guy that came over to CS, and there was a relationship between CS and AE that was kind of our sales that was kind of broken, right? Like my goal was to kind of mend that and be that bridge. But when I got to the CS side, like I was in the room, but I did not have the confidence to speak up, right? Like I was silent, for the first 6 months because I didn't think that I was the expert on anything, right? And I would also hold my questions until the end, or to take someone aside and ask questions about, what I needed to understand. And that did not serve me well, right? Like the only way to really impact your own growth is ask those questions in those scenarios, and to speak up, not necessarily when you're the expert, but when you feel like you can, just have a small addition to the conversation, right? And so I've learned from that since then. So to your point, I mean, ultimately, so I have a team of 6 SDRs today. I have one sales enablement manager underneath me as well. We had recently spun off the outbound team. I'd had some enterprise BDRs underneath my remit. We've recently spun them off into their own team, which is great. So I mean, ultimately, day to day, I'm in the management calls in the morning. We have biweekly updates in terms of what our results are. Typically, I'll do a team sync twice a week, right? And at this point, I'll communicate major updates to the team, talk through any process changes, give that little motivation, that little oomph for us to hopefully succeed throughout the day. And then from there, I mean, ultimately, I'm running one-on-ones. So I've got a weekly one-on-ones with each of my team members. I'm reviewing calls. Basically, I want to review 2 calls a week for each of my team members. And then working cross-functionally to ultimately change things for the better, right? And that can take the form of, I met with the Salesforce team today. We got some cleanup and process changes we want to do. I'm going to meet with marketing tomorrow. We got a bi-weekly kind of look at our acquisition funnel and make sure that, what we're responsible for is tight, and what I'm holding the marketing team to is ultimately getting done, right? And that pretty much encapsulates the role. But I mean, I'm reporting to the CRO today. I do get to be in the room. I almost take it for granted these days when I'm in the room with the CRO, the CEO, the VP marketing, all these folks. But it is a privilege. And one lesson actually I'm learning today, if I may, we're encountering an obstacle with kind of our booked meetings this week, and I was trying to characterize the problem that we were experiencing on the team, and this was to the CEO and to the VP marketing. And one thing I learned is, instead of showing your work and then getting to the conclusion when you're speaking to the C-suite, get to the bottom line, right?
Right, yeah.
Right. What's the message? What's the bottom line? And if they ask questions, okay, you have your work to show it. But attention spans are short, especially if people don't fundamentally understand your business and want to know that you're on it and you're capable of resolving the situation.
That's super relatable, because when you are dealing with people who are making such big decisions that affect so many people, their time is a very valuable resource. And there's this initial thing, I guess, when you're kind of young or new, or you just kind of started out in the game, there's this need to kind of validate your thoughts so that you can
Exactly.
kind of like establish that, hey, listen, like I do kind of know what I'm talking about. ABC got us here, and now we need to do one, two, three. But the reality is that C-suite group of people, they already know ABC.
Yeah.
They need you to come with one, two, three, so that you can just, get to the point and take over. And that's a hard lesson to learn for a lot of, I call them rookies or newbies in the game who are just trying to carve out that space. So that's really cool that you've made that observation in your own experience. One of the things that I keep kind of picking up on, Sean, is that you rely on systems and processes to kind of help guide what you're doing. Um, if you could maybe share some of your reasoning behind that and why that's so important to the work that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that data is your friend at the end of the day, right? Like
Mm.
I can only manage to what I can measure, right? And a former boss of mine once said, you have to inspect what you expect, right? And
Mm.
so, in order to be successful, right, you have to know your numbers. You have to know the product of your team, sorry, the production of your team. And further to that, I mean, I'm a big fan of ownership and accountability, right? I always speak to my team about, listen, like I stand between you guys and the rest of the business, right? Like what you guys do, like I'm accountable to, right? Like I own this, but I need each and every one of you to know that you own your own respective pipelines and your own respective results. And if something's not happening, right, I need you to communicate that to me because I'll do the same, up the chain. I suppose like so for example, right now we're setting up first touch time, right? It's so important that we get into contact with our leads within 5 minutes, right? There's science that if you get into touch with your leads within 5 minutes, they haven't had a chance to visit a competitor's website, right? And so by kind of instilling process within the team, right, you're able to really, I think the name of the game right now for me is mature, right? Mature your approach, mature how you're looking at things, and ultimately how your team is responding to the various inputs that they receive, right? I can only be as good as my people, and second, as good as my processes. Right? So, of course, yeah. Actually, again, another funny anecdote. My fiance and I we're planning for a wedding right now, and she's sending me all this information, all these different quotes and whatnot. And I really had to sit her down and say, okay, I'm going to bring the process-oriented Sean to you. Let's build a spreadsheet. Let's plan this out. Let's look at the budgets. Like I need to put this into a spreadsheet and organize it for myself. So even in my personal life, I take the same approach.
Congratulations on the engagement, by the way.
Thank you.
That's pretty cool. It's funny how the work that you do kind of bleeds over into your regular everyday life. I find this so frequently with the way that I communicate with my child, for example. There's a really good book I read by Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference. It's about
Yeah.
negotiating, and I tell you, I've used that book more in communicating with my parents and with my children than I have ever in sales because there's just so many valuable things in the work that we do. And to your point, being able to kind of look at, okay, I do this in this order, and I can see that when I get to step three, something falls apart.
Yeah.
So step one and two are great. They're getting me to step three, but why is step three not getting me to step four? So now you can kind of dig in and analyze that. Sean, can you share a little bit about what your kind of customer experience map looks like? So what is kind of step one, two, three for um, SysAid and in your sales process? What does that look like?
Yeah, so ultimately, within the SDR team, it's kind of, I guess, a novel idea here, but I did a bit of a reorganization around August of last year. And so previous, what I had was I had some inbound SDRs, and then I had kind of SMB BDRs. And so what we did this past year is we put in a project where I shifted the SMB BDRs to be part inbound and part outbound. But what we tried to identify some holes within the inbound process. And so what I did for the SDRs, I pivoted them to what's called an engagement SDR role. So number one, I have two people on my team that are solely responsible for 5 minute first touch time with new leads that come in. Okay. So like they are not sending cadences. They are not prospecting long term. They get a lead for 24 hours. Okay. Within that 24 hours, it is their responsibility, right, to get into contact with them. And so that's inclusive of finding all of the contact information that's relevant, potentially finding a couple multi-threaded people around it or contacts around it in order to support the next step in the process. They're also managing our chatbot on our website, and they're the engagers, right? They're the people, the first people on the front lines, right? And so ideally, music to my ears is the customer saying, "Oh, I just submitted a request to you guys. I haven't even left your website yet. That was quick," right? So first off, right, like immediate engagement is our number one goal. After those 24 hours, if we're not able to get into contact with the lead, ultimately the lead itself goes towards the what's called the nurture rep. And those are the SMB BDRs I pivoted into kind of longer term prospecting on these leads. And so within that role, right, they start multi-threading, they start running the actual cadences. They're also running kind of SMB outbound cadences as well. And ultimately between those two roles, we're able to convert about 50% of the leads that come in through North America, which is pretty high. We are able to get into contact with about 80-90%, which is great. Pulls out some things that are not relevant. But ultimately, it's the customer engagement map is we want to speak with you before you go speak to a competitor, right? We want your business. And further to that, I mean, in terms of the conversations the SDRs are having, big focus on pain, getting 3 levels of pain, really trying to drive a good needs diagnosis, right? And the hope is that in terms of what our competitors are doing, like we are having the value-added conversation, right, with our prospects. And by driving pain, we give them a reason to show up to the next demonstration or the next step in the process, and really hope that they feel, in most cases, that they feel that we understand their pain. Right, especially in a space when a lot of tools do a very similar thing.
It's hard to differentiate yourself in a market where there is so many options to pick from. Depending on what the client's needs are and getting very clear on that, being efficient. Actually, the thing that you said about that first 5 minutes, I read somewhere, I think it was Go High Level did a whole article on this based on their own research, and they have really, really solid data that if you can reach them in that first 5 minutes, it increases your conversion rate by like 842% or some ridiculous number, which is a very difficult thing. Sean, you mentioned that you implemented new stuff, and whenever you kind of change or tweak processes or systems that you have in the business, that can create new friction. It can solve problems you didn't even know you had. I wonder if you can share like some of the good and bad things that happened after you made some of those adjustments.
Sure. I mean, the project itself was a big lift. It had me working very, very closely with the marketing team, and our head office is in another country. So I flew there, whiteboarded everything. It was a very kind of intense process. Thankfully, the original goal of the project was to reduce some friction. There was, as is typical, sometimes there's friction between marketing and sales. And I always say that my demand gen counterpart, like we're going to be best friends, right? Like I want to be best friends with that person. So we actually were able to close some of the spots of friction, and some of that actually came down to attribution between the outbound team and the inbound team. But by kind of creating this hybrid role, we were able to reduce that a little bit. Having an engagement and then a nurture SDR role, it does create a small career path step within the SDR team before they step up to enterprise, outbound, and AE and beyond. I will say some days the engagement reps are underutilized, right? So I need to make sure that they have additional lists to be calling through, or that they still have their hands full. But the point for them, right, is to be available, is to be free for when those leads come in. I mean, I think we still need, like as an organization, we need to mature our lead scoring, right? And we need to make sure that we're spending our time appropriately on the leads that deserve the right amount of time. So that's still to come. And ultimately, like what I'm trying to do right now is breed kind of iteration into the SDRs themselves, right? So it's like, okay, let's take a look at our inbound cadences, right? Like, yeah, I wrote those, but it doesn't mean that I know everything that they're good, right? Like I would hope so, that they're informed. But if we're running the cadences for a certain amount of time, we all have sales law, top level analytics, what have you. I want the SDRs to say, hey, okay, this one's not performing very well in terms of open rates. Like, I want to test this new subject line, right? It's a really tough skill to ingrain, to get people, because to get folks to go beyond what's just given to them. But I firmly believe, and it was a lesson I learned, as an account executive, is like you have to be the master of your own cadences. You have to test, to try, you have to iterate, you have to record what works and what doesn't. And we're starting to see that here. So by and large, successful. I think like for my, I mentioned first touch time, still trying to iron that out, still trying to make sure that our calculations, internally in the Salesforce is correct and that the SDRs are adhering to it. That and time to demo are two areas of focus for me right now on the team.
When it comes to the types of tools and things that you're using, at the top, we touched on the idea of how you guys have been implementing some AI technologies. Is that playing a role in that kind of Fast Five, or is that something that you're still experimenting with? Where does that kind of fit into the work that you're doing, Sean?
Yeah, so ultimately, I mean, it seems like every tool these days is building in AI, right? Or
Right.
which is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Ultimately, for with Salesloft, for example, it's you're able to build content with AI or start with AI or what have you. I have to say, like for the most part, for myself, when I'm writing new cadences, I'll often start in Chat GPT with like the point of the cadence, and then like I'll tailor it and make sure it makes sense to a sales audience. We are increasing our usage of something like Gong, for example, right? Like I am spending a lot of time, yeah, using Gong trackers, doing call shadows, looking at all the information it spits out. We've even started using the Gong summaries, right, to kind of write into our notes as we pass things towards the account executives.
Mm.
I forget the name of the tool now, but we were using a tool that kind of trawl LinkedIn pages and would spit out personalization,
Mm.
right, from those pages. And even like, for our chatbot, right? Someone's coming in with a technical issue. We've now let the chatbot ingest our information, right? Our kind of technical information, I should say. So when someone has a technical question, instead of, I mean, obviously it's better to have the SDR be the expert, but it's tough to give 20 years of IT knowledge, right, to someone who's fresh out of school. So they're able to kind of leverage the AI through the chatbot in order to provide an accurate response. And I will say as well, I'll plug the AI for my company. We do use it internally, so I'll use it here. But anytime we have a tech issue, um, uh, with SysAid, we're able to use our Copilot and resolve all those low level kind of repetitive tasks like password resets and all that sort of stuff. So we get our tech issues resolved a lot quicker.
You're really in there getting dirty with this stuff. I wonder if uh, there are others who are trying to do the same things that you are doing, and it seems like you've kind of dialed in some of these tools that have really helped serve the higher purpose of what you guys are doing. What advice would you have for others who are kind of like searching for that type of stuff? Like how did you vet it? How did you decide that it was a good fit? How have you evolved those tools to make them work for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think ultimately, I would start in one of two places, right? Either asking yourself what are the outcomes you're trying to drive, and or what are the obstacles you're coming up against, or maybe not obstacles, but as you said, friction points or things that you would want to make easier today. Um, so I mean, ultimately, like as a people leader, it is so important to have a call intelligence software like Gong. So very important, and often so very important that you're giving them the appropriate feedback when they need it, right? And weekly. But if you go to the two questions, like for example, email writing is fine. It's not my, I wouldn't say bread and butter, but it's not something that I want to do all the time, but the demands of the role require, right? And so if that's a friction point for me or an obstacle to being efficient, right? I'll leverage ChatGPT in order to make my life easier, right? And so I'm often asking myself those two questions.
Yeah, really, really useful. So kind of reaching the end of our time together here, Sean, and I wonder if we were to kind of look into the future, what's on the horizon for SysAid and some of the things that you guys are doing? Any big goals that you're aiming at, or new trends that you're kind of excited about?
Um, yeah, I mean, ultimately, this has been a big year for SysAid so far. We kind of relaunched our platform, like, instilled AI into it, into every kind of element of it. Um, Further did like a whole UI UX redesign. It's great. A redesign that has been that's going to take us forward into the next 10, 20 years or so. Um, I think as part of that, it's instilling the competency in all of our sellers to be able to speak effectively to AI in the first place, right? And I
Mm,
think like what we're seeing now is we were kind of first to market with it, like actually baked into our platform from the ground up. The speed of the market is everybody has one now. All the competitors have a Copilot, um, but it's really about overcoming this kind of first adopters curve. AI still seems a little nebulous to some people, right? As it
mm,
can even to myself, right? But really, it's okay. Like this is here to stay. How do we talk effectively and intelligently about it? And how do we drive that value into how our customers perceive the tool, right?
mm.
So far, I mean, I think we've gotten, since the beginning of the year, we've gotten over 100 new customers on the Copilot. I think things are really starting to take off, and I think they'll continue to do so. So an exciting year ahead for us.
Yeah, that is really exciting to see that the market's speaking, right? They vote with their dollars, and when they have solutions that are valuable, that's where it goes. And so the growth that you've experienced is indicative of the future success that I think you guys are going to continue to achieve. So, congratulations for finding something and deploying something that actually is useful, because that doesn't happen as often as we'd like to.
Sure.
On that note, Sean, if somebody was to want to reach out to you to perhaps pick your brain further or work with you, what's the best way for somebody to do that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to do that. I can share my contact information as well if you want to share it within the podcast. But I mean, as much as someone wants to pick my brain, I'm always open to learning from others around the industry. There's still a lot to learn about IT, AI, and tech in general. So, absolutely.
Yeah, it's growing so quickly and changing and evolving constantly. So I get that desire to want to be a part of that growth and kind of pioneer things. It's a admirable trait. Sean, you've been very generous with your time and your wisdom and experience, and for that I'm very grateful. Thanks for joining me on the show. We'll make sure to link to all your contacts in the show notes if somebody wants to reach out to you. And to kind of close things off, if you're looking to get in touch with me and my team for any reason as it relates to marketing, go ahead and visit nextgengrowth.com. Otherwise, that's it for this episode, and I will see you in the next.